Now it is time for our first talk. Before I bring Professor Mitchell Green up, I would like to briefly read a biography of him. Mitch Green is a professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Virginia. He has held fellowships from the National Endowment for the Humanities, the National Science Foundation, the Andrew Mellon Foundation, the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities, the National Humanities Center, the Mead Endowment, the University of Pittsburgh Center for Philosophy of Science, the Center for Contemplative Mind in Society, the American Council of Learned Societies, the University of Virginia's Teaching Resource Center, and the University of Virginia's Shannon Center for Advanced Studies. His specializations are in philosophy of language, philosophy of mind, and aesthetics, and he is currently researching such topics as how it is possible to acquire self-knowledge from literature and the evolution of communication. So now I would like to introduce Professor Mitchell Green, who will be speaking on the meaning of life.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me okay? I was hoping that this might be the last talk of this series of the evening, given the title and topic, but I've got to run off and catch a plane immediately after giving the talk, so please accept my apologies for that. And if I have time, if I can finish this in 10 minutes, I might even have 2 minutes in which to answer any questions you might have. So we're starting at 6:40. The idea of meaning in life is at once mysterious and attractive. It is attractive because we feel on some level that if we knew what it was, we would finally know what to do with ourselves and we could stop bickering about whether this or that activity, such as making money, helping others, union with a higher being, meditation, bodos, is worth our while. But the idea of the meaning of life is also mysterious. We have no idea what it would be like to open up a box and see, gleaming within it, an authoritative answer to the question, what is the meaning of life? After all, any scenario in which we imagine opening a very special box and finding such a message purporting to express life's meaning is just one in which we probably find ourselves thinking, well, that's what you say, but I'm not into that, so that's not what gives my life meaning. That's not what gives life meaning for me. You say the meaning of life is, say, loving your neighbor, but I say it's the Norwegian death metal band Zyklon B. Bummer. As a philosopher, it's my occupational hazard and obligation to obsessively ask, in reply to things people say, 2 questions. 1, what do you mean? And 2, how do you know? We can only make progress on the second question, of course, after making some headway on the first, so I propose to try to do a little of that with our question of the moment, what is the meaning of life? If a politician starts talking to you about the, say, will of the American people, I'm inclined to wonder what justifies his use of the little word, the. It's the most common word in English, and yet it packs a lot of information. As the philosopher Bertrand Russell realized over a century ago, a sentence using the presupposes that there is at least one thing answering a certain description, and at most one such thing. As a result, a politician referring to the will of the American people makes me wonder, how do you know that there's at least one such will? And how do you know that there's at most one? Maybe there are as many wills as there are voters, with nary a generalization to be made. So too, the phrase, the meaning of life, presupposes that life has at least one, and at most one meaning. But we shouldn't accept either assumption blithely. After all, if the school of philosophy known as existentialism is right, then life has no meaning at all, and we're simply collocations of particles floating around in an indifferent universe. In a Nietzschean spirit, the most we can do is create meaning for ourselves rather than discover it. At the same time, a pluralist about meaning might suggest that there is no reason to suppose that life has at most one meaning. For all we know, maybe there are 11 things that count as life's meanings, just as there may be as many wills as there are voters. To which you might reply, look, I'll settle for one. Just let me know one thing that gives life meaning and I'll take it from there. And part of what spurs your anxiety might be something like this. We strive, struggle, hurry, fret, take SATs and GREs, grow up, get jobs, buy houses and cars, pay taxes, raise families, and so on. And yet, in the end, everything looks like it's going to turn to dust. So much toing and froing, and yet within a few billion years, our sun will turn into a red giant and destroy the solar system. Or maybe we'll trash our planet and all life forms on it before we figure out how to get ourselves to another location that will support life. Either way, the prognosis for genuine permanence isn't particularly good. Given that, you might feel that if only you could be sure of at least one thing that would give life meaning, the fleetingness of your life and of humanity more generally would be a little easier to take. Some might say, right, this is where my faith comes in. What gives meaning to my life is hope for a better place elsewhere and for eternity. But if your life would be without meaning if it were only finite, how would getting a backstage pass to a place that would enable you to go on infinitely make it meaningful? It's not as if we suppose that the only good bands are the ones that play forever. Bonnaroo will be awesome even when it's over. Why should we think that the only worthwhile lives are those that go on forever? Well, if meaning doesn't come from eternity, where might it come from then? My middle name is Shepherd, after my great-granduncle Shepsy, who died at the hands of the Nazis. He had been training to be a rabbi when he was packed into a cattle car and sent to a concentration camp. I sometimes wonder what went through his mind as he, in his last moments in the gas chamber, as he asphyxiated on Zyklon B, the real Zyklon B. Did he feel his life had been pointless? I hope not, and I hope that he might have had an inkling that perhaps part of what gave his life value was that he had been striving to do something that rightly mattered to him, even though he apparently did not achieve his aim. I carry around in me the legacy of a forebear, murdered for his heritage and his values. I switched a moment ago from speaking of meaning to speaking of value, and this was intentional. In lieu of an oracle that can tell us that life has at least one meaning and what that or those meanings are, I suggest that a better route might be to consider how we might find value in some of the things that we do. Here I'm speaking of intrinsic value, mentioned a moment ago by one of our introducers. Intrinsic value rather than instrumental value. These are philosophy terms, so I'll try to explain them. Most, though perhaps not all of us, value money instrumentally, in that we care about what it can get us and not as an end in itself. Some people might feel otherwise, and the majority of people, I'm hoping, care about money as an instrumental way at most. Some things that money can get us and some things that money can't get us are valuable in a different way, namely intrinsically. Walking along the beach with my daughter and dog, as we did last summer, seeing wild dolphins frolic in the sea, was valuable for its own sake and not because of any good that came of it. Teaching my students and doing my research brings in a paycheck, all right, but that's not why I do these things. I do them because I care about helping others to cultivate their minds and more broadly themselves. These things are intrinsically valuable for me. To take the step from value to meaning, we might note that someone might find something intrinsically valuable even when it seems, to the rest of us at least, meaningless. George might find intrinsic worth in collecting string. Susan might be really into spelling backwards everything that other people say. Both activities seem kind of pointless, like Sisyphus pushing his boulder. What George and Susan seem to be missing is some reflection on whether these are things they should care about. I'm now suggesting that what might take us from things that we find valuable, even intrinsically valuable, to things that are meaningful, is the process of reflecting on whether the things we do value for their own sake are things that we would still value, all things considered, and after collecting a reasonable variety of experience. Socrates said that the unexamined life is not worth living. I find this dictum, as it stands, kind of high-handed myself. He's telling me that people who don't engage in self-examination live worthless lives. It seems a bit rich. Fortunately, there's textual evidence from Plato to read that dictum as saying that the unexamined life is not worthless, but rather not to be lived. Your life still might be worth living if you don't examine it, but you're probably missing something. And what I'm not suggesting is that if you don't ask yourself now or sometime soon whether the things that you do care about are things that you should care about, you're in danger of missing out on a lot of meaning. But now suppose George decides, the guy who's into that string, suppose he decides on reflection that string, in its kaleidoscope of colors and textures, is just beautiful to behold and lovely to collect. And then so be it. Collecting string can give his life meaning. I think he's a little odd, but he might think me odd for spending endless hours reading and writing books and yammering to my who's. Susan at least makes it interesting by doing it backwards. But the three of us could make peace. For I'm suggesting that what gives life meaning is not something external, shimmering up on top of a tall mountain. Rather, it's inside of you. But that is not to say that it's always going to be the first thing that comes to mind. You might intrinsically value something for reasons that, on reflection, turn out to be flimsy. A life devoted to pursuing such ends is, if not meaningless, then less meaningful than it could be. Self-examination is a good rule of thumb because it increases the chances that the things you land on as intrinsically valuable are things that are worth valuing. So, as you prepare to head out into the mosh pit of life soon or eventually after graduating, whatever that might be, and terrifying, grotesque, beautiful, and occasionally even sublime as it may be, I urge you to ask yourself, of the things that you value, which are the ones you continue to value even on reflection? And if you feel your range of experience is too narrow, to answer that question reliably just yet, widen your range of experience and try again a few years later. Things might look different from Norway. That only took me 10 minutes. So that means we've got time for 1 minute worth of questions. Anybody have a question? I can't talk in front of students without asking for questions. You're into string. Please. Loudly.
Who's your favorite philosopher? Who do you identify as?
My favorite philosopher. That's a really hard question, but I guess it's a hard question, but I'd have to say it's probably Socrates, who is kind of nuts, but sort of cool too. Spent all his time hanging out in the Agora, never published a word, wouldn't have gotten tenure by any chance. Please.
I was wondering why you said that you hoped that no one would find money
Intrinsically valuable.
Yeah, intrinsically valuable, because what came to mind is you hear a lot of rappers just like rapping about how like money is big.
Yeah.
And like that's their like end, and I was just wondering.
Yeah, I'm guessing that when someone says how proud they are about how much money they've made, they probably value it in an instrumental way in the following sense. They probably take it as being valuable because it serves another purpose, namely it shows the world how much status they have. Right? If you've got the money to have diamonds embedded in your teeth. People do this. Flossing must be hard. But anyway, if you have that kind of money, it's probably not the case that you're really into the sheer aesthetics of it, but rather being able to say to the world, I can do this. Right? And so it's that kind of instrumental value. It's not necessarily using money to purchase a tangible object that you can flaunt, but it's more using it to show the world how able you are, how talented you are, tough, whatever. That'd be my suggestion. But if somebody thinks, no, I just like those dollar bills, those greenbacks, I just think they're great. I look at them all day and they're It's not logically incoherent, it's possible, it's a little odd, but if somebody what I'm trying to take into account with this, and I'm not trying to impose from outside on anybody a certain specific conception of what is worthwhile. So part of the sort of idea here is to say, you've got to be the one who creates your meaning. You've got to be the one who says what makes value and meaning in your life. I would hope that you spend enough time reflecting and getting a broad bird's eye view on things so that you can, the first things that come to mind aren't necessarily what you stick with in the end. All too often, and maybe not barely, but very often, when you get some experience traveling or meeting people from different cultures and so forth, you probably will change your views. But if somebody says, day one, money, and then 5 years later, money, I hope they're happy. Time for one last question. Yes, please.
It's important to realize you find something of value. How important is it to define why you find value?
If you find something of value, how important is it that you figure out why you find it of value? Yeah, good question. I think there probably is some reason for looking behind that, as it were, and trying to figure out why it is that you find that valuable. I don't think we're always going to succeed. There might be some things that we just find gorgeous, powerful, moving, fantastic, and can't say why. But my suggestion, if I were to meet someone like that, is to say, insofar as you can back up and think about the source of your valuing, you might be able to broaden, find new things to value as well. The reason I find this kind of music so fantastic, you might say, is that it enables me to empathize with people from with a very different set of attitudes from me, somebody might say. To which I say, oh, well, if that's how you feel, I've got something else that you love. Right? So if somebody can back up a little bit and explain why it is they intrinsically value the things that they do, that increases the chances, it's not a guarantee, but increases the chances that someone else or they themselves will be able to get deeper insight into the possibilities and ways in which they could broaden out and find other sources of intrinsic value too. Not a guarantee, but just a probability. All right, I think I'm out of time. Thank you all.